last time we got together, we went to 15 countries in Europe in 1 hour. That was pretty good. But today we're not going to as many countries, but we're going to cover a lot more territory. So I hope you have on your most comfortable walking shoes, but you're also ready to do some hop, skip, and jumping. Canada is our country's next door neighbor. It's the second largest country in the world, and it has the longest border of any country in the world. Despite these impressive statistics, when I try to remember what I learned about Canada in school, I think that information would fit in a thimble with room left over. But since school days, our family has spent a fair amount of time in Canadian cities, campgrounds, parks, and on the roads. And I've really grown to appreciate the beauty and the history of that country. So we're going to start our trip today on the East Coast in Nova Scotia. Soon after the French came there, they built a large fort on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. Then the British took it over. The fort was designed, of course, to keep out the enemy, whoever that enemy might be. Over the centuries, no enemy has ever attacked the fort. Nevertheless, every day, precisely at noon, the huge cannon shoots off its warning blast. The sound of peace at the Halifax Citadel. The noon gun blasts news of peace today after centuries of todays. It celebrates a fort that has protected, threatened, but never engaged. For British feared French hubris, then American manifest destiny, and finally Axis submarines. The star-shaped fortress is studded with ruddy tartan guards who perfect watchful waiting. On the east parapet, a kilted Scotian considers his battle scars, 2 chapped kneecaps, while a wind-blown dove perches securely on his wool-padded shoulder, nibbling an ancient olive leaf. From the time Europeans first settled in what we now call the maritime provinces, the 2 main industries were fishing and coal mining. We know the fishing in the North Atlantic is not as good as it used to be, and the coal mines are all antiquated and shut down. This means many people must leave home to seek work. And in Nova Scotia, they joke that they have 2 capital cities, Halifax at home and Boston. But it's not easy to leave home, the place you've grown up with, to leave your family and your friends. Here's one man's lament as he faces that journey. If I can't take the island with me, before I leave, I'll climb my hill to rub wild lavender in my hair, to etch the stormy coast on my skin, to stash fresh breeze in my veins. If I can't take the island with me, before I leave, I'll join McNabb for a fast-paced, whiskey-laced Cayley fest, our fiddles pulsing Gaelic notes, our smoky music curling up to heaven. If I can't take the island with me, before I leave, I'll cache wee squalls, entrust my father's lore to the eldest bairn. I'll memorize young Maggie's laughing lilt and trace soft lines on my woman's face. And when I leave, my suitcase will near burst with sight and scent, with sound and sigh. It will throb with clannish rhyme and chant, the family bonds that space cannot erase. After I leave, the rocks will lie bare, the rugged coast a parched and salty crust. the wind whistling hollow off-key notes, the lavender all turned to dust. Till I return, I'll bear the guilt of theft I could not resist, my sin atoned beside a peaty fire, where my lad relights our timeless tales. Now we're going to head west across Canada's Great Plains, and our first stop will be in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. Moose Jaw is one of many towns, probably all over the world, that exists only because the railroad came through here. I'm sure that it was Al Capone's favorite Canadian city. During our years of Prohibition, he would buy legal Canadian whiskey and have it shipped on the direct rail line from Moose Jaw down to Minneapolis, where he had a distribution center. But I think a much more important story about this town lies underground. When the homes were built, they all had basements to house the furnaces. And then a whole network of tunnels was excavated to connect those basements. And that was to make it easier to service the furnaces, especially during the harsh winters. Sometime later, after the Canadian Transcontinental Railroad was finished, many of its Chinese immigrant workers found themselves in a terrible predicament. Although they had labored very, very hard, they had not saved up enough money for passage back home. Mostly they couldn't even repay the people who had sponsored them to come to Canada in the first place. A small number of them took refuge in those basement tunnels of Moose Jaw. They set up cots in the cubicles, set up little businesses in the passageways. They were allowed to walk around town, maybe go in the shops, but the locals were not hospitable. Unrewarded labor. In Moose Jaw, they serviced steam furnaces with a maze of basement-level tunnels, never dreaming a different future for their humble use. Years later, penniless Chinese immigrants who had survived building rails across the land now sought sanctuary in these earthen mole runs. They made their makeshift homes in squalid passageways where daylight never pierced and fresh breeze never dared. They slaved in laundries and burlap-making shops, slowly repaying their long overdue debts for passage to Canada. They had permission to surface, but local bigotry forced them back beneath that thankless alien world. In perennial misery they labored. In muted despair they smoked opium. In abject boredom they gambled at mahjong. And all the while this grim drama played out its lines. Mr. and Mrs. Jones rode in cushioned luxury across the land in naive ignorance of their benefactors. Continuing west, we come to Lethbridge in Alberta province. We see right away that the residents have built a beautiful garden by their town lake. It's to honor their sister city in Japan. We've been on the road a while, so let's take a leisurely walk through this little garden of surprises. Learning Japanese at Nika Yuko Garden. Start with the name, Nika Yuko, and dissect its parts. Nik for Japanese, Ka for Canadian. The two welded to Yuko for friendship. Ponder, while crossing the arched moon bridge, how two nations have made peace with canopy junipers, mugo pine, amber maple, cranapple, and spirea. Know these plants were chosen to withstand bruising winter prairie winds before they present their gifts of bud and bloom that open like origami each spring. Remove your shoes at the tea house doorway to absorb textured tatami, woven floor mats, and walk through shoji, a sliding door, to the view just beyond. Do not step on the dry garden, for its sand furrows portray exact rightness, perfect alignment, total harmony on a windless day. Instead, exhale all dark vapors, inhale the geometric grid, and focus on a granular sea that defines silence, its wavelets frozen in space. Wander to Shikai, a borrowed view, where you gaze at a neighbor's watery yard, officially the city's Henderson Lake, its gentle blues welcoming you. Note each lakeside pebble, hand-placed, with an overlap here, a tucking under there, the water stopping respectfully at shoreline. Watch turtles at their spa, basking on smooth water-lap stones, showing how to turn shells against stress, how to let sun cool your agenda. Lean right to view the pagoda, its Azumaya shelter, emerging from the trees, a moment ago invisible, but now tokonoma, an alcove you call sanctuary. Stroll around a shrubby bend to the fresh mist of a waterfall's descent, and listen to its lilting music revealed in cascading thirds. Learn to say wabi, the beauty of simplicity. Repeat it as a mantra until your toes are splayed into comfort, and its translation is your own. While we're in Alberta, we'll take time to think about the native people who carved out a life here long before the Europeans showed up. We know all too well that here in the U.S., the immigrants have done some terrible things to the native people. Unfortunately, Canada has similar stories at times. The country has tried to atone in recent years. They call Native people First Nation people now, honor their customs, their languages. They've even carved out a new province for people who want to live near the Arctic Circle. But you can imagine that when First Nation people look up their history, there's still sorrow, disappointment, anger. As one man follows his native trail that is now a major highway, south from the provincial capital of Edmonton down to Calgary, he reflects on this harsh history. Deerfoot Trail. You can still follow Deerfoot Trail, south from Edmonton to Calgary, if you don't mind loping beside 4 lanes of wheeled hikers. You throw on Levi's and a flannel shirt. Say goodbye with English words. Try not to call this sacred route Canada's Trail of Tears. There's no loss in leaving the capital city, where the village longhouse looms 40 stories high, packed with computers and their slaves, while gray suits prevail in the council tents. First Nation remnants reel down cracked sidewalks, scanning rank alleys for their lost totems. The old spirits that guided now blur through smoky tavern panes. White man's in charge now, and the songs, stories, rhythms of your grandmother's lodge are plowed under, buried in concrete. Most of the Haida tribes live on the west coast of British Columbia, The men carve beautiful totem poles, which are then positioned in a public place for everyone to appreciate. The rule is, once a totem pole is in place, it must not be altered in any way, for that would be a sacrilege. Some archaeologists, historians from the museum in Vancouver came to one community, saw a beautifully carved totem that was so old and weathered, it looked as though it might not survive one more winter. They negotiated to take it back to the museum to preserve it. Unfortunately, their boat was too short to accommodate the pole in one piece. And so to take it back, they had to cut it into 3 pieces. So, sacrilege or preservation, which is it? How the Haida learned the cost of preservation. Through winter's long chill rains, the Haida chips and shapes, runs rough fingers over and through his work. Come spring, he and his brothers drag the long pole, then hoist it into its public place. Women and children eye the chiseled lines, trace menacing patterns that must stand unaltered. Open-mouthed, they gaze at these wooden notes of history that sing of bear, eagle, and beaver, preserving Haida lore. Later, anthropologists from the museum, Preservation Hall of the Whites, discover and act. They yank the shaggy totem from its 40-year home, saving it from natural erosion of wind and salt. Swiftly they saw it into thirds for transport to safe quarters, desecrating its sacred aura, its protective scowls. Now Haidas can pay admission to see their holy history triparted into totem, totem, and totem. I was really shocked when we went to the museum and saw there was no attempt to reassemble the totem pole. It was displayed in 3 pieces, side by side. We may think of the gold rush of the late 1890s as an Alaska story, but many of the prospective miners who landed in Alaska and bought their supplies there then made the treacherous trip into Canada's Yukon Territory. There are those today who say, at this point it doesn't matter whether somebody found gold or did not find gold. What we should do is celebrate these people who followed their dreams and had an adventure, harsh as it may have been, that no one could ever take away from them. Where it begins and where it ends. The adventure begins in Skagway. No, it begins when you turn your back on the plow, when you shut the door to your tiny shop, when you spurn your wife's clawing embrace. In fact, it begins when the first news comes that gold paves the landscape up north, and you dream that your pockets could burst their seams with Yukon nuggets. You join 1 million other men who have all caught the disease, that overpowering urge to exchange everyday rigors for the unknown rigors of frozen waste. By the time you reach Skagway, you are near mad with anticipation. Your days and nights filled with visions of riches beyond your craving. You've already learned that every man is your enemy in that relentless competition with few winners. And you sense the aloneness of your mission in a place where wolves and bears will be your closest friends. You spend your last dollars on flour, bacon, sugar, and beans, then haul them piecemeal up the ice steps into Tormented Valley and down Troublesome Creek, desperately hoping to reach your own glitter gulch. And when you finally return home, whether rich or poor, you've had an experience that shines beyond all expectations and marks you for all time as one who seized the moment and transformed a giddy escapade into a gleaming fortune. Well, it's getting a little chilly up here in the Yukon. I suggest that we take one really big hop down to the Caribbean. You're all with me, aren't you? Okay. When I think of this area, the first thing that comes to mind is music and rhythm. Calypso beat. Calypso calls your name, sways your hips, climbs your neck, snaps your fingers. Calypso slants your hat, blasts your shirt, shims your legs, curls your toes. Calypso lifts your pulse in sun-red raps, claims your soul without consent. Just across the waters in Costa Rica, we all gather at an outdoor shelter where we enjoy some nice, fresh, juicy pineapple chunks. Then we take a narrow path through a mangrove swamp down to the boat that will take us into the jungle. Rules of the jungle. We turn our backs on the tang of fresh-cut pineapple, its sweet juices still tickling our hands, on the salsa beat of bongos still pumping in our ears, on the palm frond roof which sheltered our tourist pack. We tramp to the brown, briny river, a tall cafe latte that spills into large curves and overflows into muddy saucers. Soon mangrove swallows, petite penguins on the wing, escort our barge with flits and swoops, while lazing crocodiles barely eye us from the gummy flats of the bank. On a low branch, the white ibis idles, uncaring of the roseate spoonbill across the ooze. Our guide calls out a babble of identities, from willet to bare-throated tiger heron. We hear the great kiskadee sing its name and watch a howler monkey reveal its perch. We are drawn into this wild place like mangrove roots, half submerged in liquid land, stretching for the sun, but clawing for earthen support, struggling to learn the rules of the jungle from the confines of our boat. Struck by our own absurdity, we throw back our heads and give the laughing falcon a competing whoop. Now we're going to take another boat and head for the tiny island nation of Dominica. We're going to talk about water. As we approach the island, the air is fresh and clear, but suddenly a little shower comes and goes, leaving just a rainbow in its wake. After we dock, we walk through the town, and we see that the gardens and yards are thriving, they're well watered, despite the intense heat. We take a bus to the top of the mountain where there's a rainforest that depends on torrential downpours. But coming back down the mountain, we learn that water has not always been equitably distributed. In Dominican waters, we ease into the dock that pulls us close to aquamarine homes, tourist shops, and yacht basins, all saluting their fine harbor view. Despite the morning sun, a misty rain makes a sudden sweep into our faces as we stand deckside, then treats us as if an apology to a double-arching rainbow. Here in whitewashed Rousseau, the rain barrels garner 50 inches a year, to make a garden thrive despite the deep Caribbean heat. We zig through the town and begin our spiral climb to the central rainforest, where clouds release a drenching 400 inches each year. Tramping through Morne Trois Pitons, we are surrounded by outsized vines, shrubs and trees that compete in their jungle highlands, sinuous aggression, their trademark. Water tickling the shores, water servicing the coast, water thundering the park. And yet, along our narrow descent road, men carve out ditches for water pipes. Women who never turned a faucet, and men who never sang in the shower, will soon have a private waterfall beneath their hot tin roofs. It would be wonderful if all Latin American history were uplifting and positive. Unfortunately, it is not. Within 50 years of coming to the New World, Spain claimed 2/3 of the Americas, and most of that conquest came at the expense of native people. That conquest came and spread like wildfire. When Columbus crossed the ocean, he brought matches, and on Hispaniola, he touched one to native kindling wood. Sparks darted along the beach bank. Low bush heat consumed Carib campfires, and sadistic flames crisped Arawak villages. The fires arced over open waters and raced around startled continents. In 50 years' time, the Spanish flag stabbed into charred soil from Patagonia to California. Alacaluf, Ona, Inca, Aztec, Maya, Zuni, Pueblo, Apache, Navajo, Calusa, all choked on smoldering ashes, while Los Conquistadores spread hot coals for God, gold, and glory. The flaming trinity's inner letters danced, transposed, coalesced into a seriously singed empire, a molten collage of slave-holding, civilized colonies. The conquest was not just 1500s, 1600s. Here's a news item from 1908. San Andres de Sotavento, Colombia. Oil is discovered. The government decides that Indians don't exist. That magic touch. Shazam conjured law number 1905/55, uttered by a shaman governor, hocus pocused onto parchment by a hoodoo scribe, and duly wanded by the Voodoo Congress in Bogota. Shazam vanished the natives of San Andres de Sotavento. Rabbits forever concealed in magical hats, no longer. Hauled water, wove serapes, sowed beans, told stories, trekked hillsides, fished streams, boiled tubers, fed children, or took breath. Their replacement smelled sweeter to crimson-caped colonials as they watched the ground bubble viscous treasure into their abracadabra pockets. Chile is a long, skinny country. Its average is about 100 miles wide, but it's over 2,000 miles long. So I thought a long, skinny country deserved a long, skinny poem. Bad case of the narrows. Slim, slim Chile curls along its spine of leggy Andes and turns its back on neighboring pampas. Slim, slim Chile faces its island fringe, west and south, guarding disputed borders of uninhabited shores. Slim Slim Chile, caught up in a borrowed tango, exudes a spicy salsa of Spanish, German, Serb, and German. Slim Slim Chile, of the originals, Yagan, Ona, Haush, Alakavu, penguins, only the birds remain. Slim Slim Chile, are you a land stretched too long, too narrow, too fractured for both natives and transported genes? Now we're going to jump up quite a distance north to the Amazon. We're going to take a ship 1,000 miles up this river. As we travel, we'll see a lot of little wooden houses perched precariously along the riverbanks. And in some places, the jungle comes right down to the water's edge. Finally, we reach the city of Manaus. This is no backwater village. Over 1 million people live in this city, even though they can only come and go by boat or plane. Each spring, when the Andes Mountains, the snow melts in the Andes Mountains, the water flows into over 1,000 streams and rivers, and they all feed into the Amazon. So as it makes its way to the sea, it becomes more and more powerful. But spring is also the time when the Atlantic Ocean tides are at their highest and their strongest. And so these two watery giants smack together, producing a terrible noise they call Porta Roca. And it was the ocean that wins the day. It pushes the Amazon back sometimes 100 miles and floods everything in sight. Amazonian. One ice crystal, tricked by the sun's warm promise, succumbs to the siren call, trickling the only way it knows, into tiny cracks, crusted gullies, sudden waterfalls, down, down, and down, into the Napo, Putumayo, Caqueta, and 1,000 more streams. At Manaus, that teeming, steaming inland port, they acquire a known name, Amazon, muddy queen of rivers. Here the silver waters are camouflaged into cafe latte for the long run to the ocean. Their pure Andean genes, forever submerged in silt. The water rumbles past stilted houses, where listless women lean on splintered sills and gaze at the rushing river that defines their days. Outside, family canoes pulse against their mooring poles, ready to skim the wet highway to the town market. The mile-wide cut in the jungle broadens to 200 at the Crowning Delta, framed by trader cities, Belém and Macapá. Here, exhausted debris drops into a dump of unruly islands, splitting the surging waters into still surging gushes that challenge the Atlantic. Here, each second, 80 million buckets of water thrust their mighty gift into the ocean. No passive recipient, the sea states its own agenda, a schedule of salty tides and a rhythm of ebb, neap, and high that brook no nonsense from the intruder. The waters collide, sending the feisty river into reverse, flooding lowlands for miles behind. This is the moment of Porta Roca, the unearthly clatter of battling giants, each claiming right of way, while natives prepare for the spring flood, content to know it will abate when one ice crystal no longer hears that Merlin voice. Even though we're on a mighty river, as we look around, the little boats we see are so fragile looking, it's hard to imagine they would survive one day's outing. A daring bargain. Baleen, Macapa, Parentines, all snugged up against the mighty river, their inhabitants ruled by boats and water, muddy, roiling, chocolate water. Little skiffs so shivery one thumbprint could overturn. Crammed ferries so wobbly one fishlet could sink. Decrepit dinghies so fragile one fin flip could upend. Gas station floats so tipsy one strong bubble could topple. And yet, each day they rise with the sun to ply their trades, to keep peace with the surging Amazon, their keeper, but potential doom. We'll get off our boat long enough to take a little walk into the jungle. We're caught between wanting to see something really exciting on the one hand, but on the other, not wanting that really exciting thing to be dangerous for us. Perilous times. The idea of a jungle, with its presumption of danger, lurks in our imagination. Stealthy tigers, rapacious snakes, spitting monkeys, army ants, clutter our fervid conjectures. And yet, when the moment comes to tramp into the human minefield, we spot one puny tarantula at rest on a vine-strangled tree. While we cheer the absence of explosive encounters and frightening confrontations, the shrapnel of disappointment cuts deeply. Elsewhere in Brazil, there's an interesting little note of history that's tied to our American South. After the Civil War, many southern farms were completely devastated. A small number of farmers gathered their few possessions and steamed down to Brazil. Fair trade. After the war, when the land cursed its sere brown stalks, when the empty barnyard echoed from blue and gray thievery, when the house grieved its ravaged rooms, it was then they packed a trunk, rode to the sea, and steamed to Brazil. There they baked a plot of land, a few seeds, and time to stutter into Portuguese. And in return, they offered watermelon, fried chicken, and hot cornbread, paying in full the immigrant fee. We can't go to Brazil without stopping at least a little bit in Rio de Janeiro. Today we're going to visit the statue that's on the mountain overlooking the city. It's called Christ the Redeemer, or Cristo Redentor. Seeking deliverance in Rio. We leave our posh hotel that claims the ocean view, only a half block downhill from the slip-sliding slum whose scavenged boards and tin roofs cling tenaciously by their owner's will. We board the chartered bus that delivers us to the incline that climbs to the escalator that faces the elevator that leads to the steep path that reveals Cristo Redentor. Quirky transport fades into mere memory as we gaze at the statue's outstretched arms that seem to protect sumptuous Palacio and Barrio Hovel alike. They offer comfort to a city racked with corruption, poverty, and disease. Later, we descend as changed people blessed by a monument whose very name proclaims redemption. Now we have to be our most athletic. You may want to take a running start for this one. We are going to leap across the whole Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea. And I hope we all land together in Egypt. Of course, we have to see the pyramids. As we're headed toward our destination, our guide tells us repeatedly, do not, I say, do not buy anything from the vendors who walk all around the pyramids. We will take you to a safe place later where you can buy anything you want. Not 20 seconds after she leaves the bus, one tourist decides she absolutely has to have the postcard a vendor is dangling in front of her face. As she opens her wallet to get out a $1 bill, his fingers slip in next to hers and pull out the 20. He disappears into the crowd. Our guide has also told us, do not take a ride on a camel. Well, there's fellas thinking, what do you mean, not take a ride? This is the only chance in my whole life I could ever ride a camel. Of course I'm going to do that. So he negotiates what he thinks is a pretty good price. He takes his ride, comes back to the starting place. The camel stands stock still. The camel owner stares into space. Finally, the rider calls down, hey, I need to get off the camel now. And the camel driver smiles and says, oh, perhaps you did not understand. The money you gave me was for the ride. If you want my camel to kneel, cough it up. So we're dealing with some slippery operators here. Strange bedfellows at Giza. Geometry strikes you first. 3 solid pyramids celebrate 3 designing pharaohs who measured their futures with 1,000,000 mud bricks. Laboring under the whip, napkin-clad masons stacked and packed to reach symmetrical peaks. Grand, majestic, colossal. Can words circumscribe their eminence? But oh my, the company these ancients keep, skimming the sinking sands, wily vendors of postcards and plastic polygons, cajole, hassle, sidewind into an open purse. Scamming naive tourists, cameleers offer once-in-a-lifetime rides upon their smirky, smelly beasts, not revealing the fee covers only half the fare. It's $20, $30, $40 more to convince camels to kneel again, and even they grin at the old trick. 3 slant beauties, symbols of perfect mathematics, etched outlines in the clear Egyptian sky, stand helpless amid unruly ragtag hawkers who practice all the angles. Now we're going to slide all the way down to South Africa. We're staying in a lovely little rondavel house that sits all by itself in the bushveld, that arid beige landscape. We look out the window and we see one of Africa's signature trees, the baobab. It's kind of a strange looking tree with its branches poking up into the sky. The baobab story. God planted it upside down, they say. Just look how those gnarly branches push up and out in random root-like webs that invade the sky, then cloak themselves in an unruly mess of greens. Devoid of self-pity, the hermit tree hands out favors to the woman who grinds its seeds into coffee, to the man who conjures glue from its pollen, to the child who savors its tart juices, to the baboon that craves its hardy fruit, to the elephant that shreds its ample canopy, to all who slouch midday beneath its umbrella arms. In return, the birds share their morning prayers and sing sunset lullabies at twilight, while bats pollinate its night-blooming flowers and deep-hidden waters hydrate its mission. Giving and receiving, the Baobab maintains its vigil through rhythmic tidal centuries, a lighthouse in the oceanic savanna, an ebb and flow beacon shining all day, every day. Now it's time to take a walk in the bushveld, but be sure to bring a good stout stick with you, because you never know when you're going to meet a slithering or a pouncing creature in the bushveld. In this desolate land, where trees know no strait, where rain is counted in scant millimeters, here we have built our island where civilized behavior can prevail. Here on this slight hummock in raw bushveld, we hibernate in our brick rondavel, heavy beamed and thickly thatched. Outside, at the eye-distant trough, guinea fowl jump on their table, monkeys splash hands in the water, and bosbok drop their waist, each tolerating the other. Later, when we leave our pinnacle, we walk through grasses slanted in unison from winter winds to listen to sunbugs buzz and turtle doves coo. Baboons preen their babies with a cunning touch. The hornbill makes another dinner trek to the noisy nest, and a hartebeest licks her newborn, urging it to its feet. We brandish our walking sticks, totems against the python and mamba, wondering if we will be safe from the wild beasts of the veld. Somewhat farther north, we stop at one of many small settlements called Kraals, K-R-A-A-L-S. The women are clustered around a visitor who represents a charity that provides animals and training in animal care to impoverished people, to give them an economic boost and also to lift their spirits. So we're going to finish our trip today with her message of hope. Tinogana. In a kraal, daubed with barely this and barely that, a pale woman, an outsider, sits with me and my kin. The air hangs like dung over our circle. Tinogana. She listens to dreams no one dared speak till she came with her promises. She whispers, name your wish, then make it happen. Tinogana. I have always carried the water, swept the hut, lived for the man who traded a cow for my indenture. Tinogana. She passes around the hope word, and we echo its never-practiced sound. A breeze stirs. Tinogana. She lets us spin a web of imaginings, then smiles at our secrets revealed. The wind picks up. Tinogana. I see myself learning to milk goats, selling their milk in the market, having coins to buy Ola's school books. Tinogana. I laugh and elbow my cousin, wrapped in the gift we have already received. A whirlwind eddies through our compound. Tinogana, it can be done. Thank you all for coming today.